The barbell slammed onto the rack with a sharp metallic crack that echoed through the sealed training gym. "Not a parlor, bitch!" Petty Officer Dylan Mercer stepped closer to the bench press, his shadow falling over the woman lying beneath the bar. The gym fell quieter. A few operators paused mid-set. Others leaned casually on machines, pretending not to watch. Because this gym, deep inside Falcon Ridge Naval Training Compound, was not a place civilians wandered into. And the woman on the bench definitely looked like one. She wore loose navy scrubs under a gray hoodie. Her dark hair was tied into a messy bun, and her sneakers looked more suited for hospital floors than combat training mats. But the weight on the bar told a different story. 200 pounds. She pushed the bar upward again, arms steady. 1 rep, 2, 3. Mercer scoffed loudly. "You deaf or something?" She racked the bar slowly and sat up. Her breathing was calm, controlled. She wiped sweat from her forehead with the sleeve of her hoodie. "I said," Mercer continued, voice rising, "this isn't a parlor. You don't come here to play around." The woman looked up at him. Her eyes were tired, but sharp. "I've got 2 sets left." Her voice was soft, not apologetic, just matter of fact. A couple of the operators exchanged glances. Mercer blinked once, then laughed. "Oh, you've got 2 sets left?" he repeated, turning to the others. "Did you hear that?" A few chuckles rippled through the room. One of the younger operators muttered, "Bold move." Mercer leaned closer, resting one hand on the barbell. "You work in the hospital, right? I've seen you around. Passing out ice packs or something." She didn't respond, just adjusted the plates on the bar. That annoyed him even more. "This gym is for operators," Mercer continued. "Guys who actually deploy." Still nothing. The woman lay back on the bench again and gripped the bar. The silence stretched. Mercer's jaw tightened. "Did you seriously just ignore me?" The bar lifted again. Smooth, controlled, rep after rep. A few operators stopped completely now, watching. There was something strange about the way she moved. Not sloppy, not hesitant. Every motion was precise, like she'd done this thousands of times. Mercer crossed his arms. "You know what?" he said loudly. "Let me make this simple." He leaned down beside her. "You don't belong here." The bar came down, paused on her chest, then pushed back up again. Another perfect rep. Mercer exhaled sharply through his nose. Unbelievable. Across the gym floor, Commander Adrian Holt had been finishing a set of deadlifts. He lowered the bar slowly, his attention drifting toward the commotion. Holt was a tall man in his early 40s with streaks of gray cutting through his dark hair. Years of deployments had carved sharp lines into his face. He glanced over just in time to see the woman rack the bar again. She sat up, pulled her hoodie collar aside to wipe sweat from her neck, and for a split second, a small black tattoo became visible just below her ear. Holt froze. The symbol was tiny, faded, but unmistakable. His eyes narrowed. Meanwhile, Mercer was still talking. "Look," he said impatiently, "I'm trying to do you a favor before someone from command walks in and kicks you out." The woman swung her legs off the bench. "I said I'm finishing my sets." Mercer barked a laugh. "You're really pushing it." One of the operators whispered to another, "She's got guts. I'll give her that." Mercer pointed toward the door. "Take your dumbbells and go back to the hospital gym." The woman stood. Up close, she was shorter than Mercer by several inches, but something about the way she stood, calm, steady, made the air feel tense. "I'm not in your way," she said quietly. Mercer leaned closer, lowering his voice. You are now. Behind them, footsteps echoed across the rubber gym flooring. Heavy, measured. Commander Holt approached slowly. Mercer. His voice cut through the room like a blade. Mercer straightened immediately. Sir. Holt didn't look at him yet. His eyes were fixed on the woman, specifically on the small tattoo near her neck. The woman noticed his stare and quickly adjusted her collar. Too late. Holt had already seen it. His voice was quiet. Where did you get that? Mercer frowned slightly. Sir? But Holt ignored him. His gaze remained locked on the woman. The room had gone completely silent now. Even the music playing faintly from the gym speakers felt distant. The woman hesitated. It's old, she said. Holt took another step closer. Answer the question. Mercer glanced between them. Sir, I was just explaining the gym rules. Mercer. Holt's tone hardened. That'll be enough. Mercer fell silent. The commander stopped a few feet away from the woman. His eyes studied her face carefully. Recognition flickered there, but he wasn't certain yet. What's your name? Holt asked. The woman seemed to weigh the question. Like answering it might open a door she preferred to keep closed. Finally, she sighed. Clara. Clara what? She hesitated again. Across the gym, several operators leaned closer, pretending to stretch while listening. Finally, she answered. Clara Hayes. The name hit Holt like a punch. His eyes widened slightly. For a moment, no one spoke. Mercer frowned. You know her, sir? Holt's gaze never left Clara. His voice dropped almost to a whisper. That's not possible. Clara looked down at the floor. Mercer shifted awkwardly. Sir, she's just one of the nurses from base hospital. Holt interrupted him. Mercer. Yes, sir. Do you see that tattoo? Mercer glanced at Clara's neck. Looks like some kind of trident. Holt nodded slowly. Yes. His expression grew darker. That's exactly what it is. Mercer shrugged. So? Holt finally looked at him, and Mercer immediately sensed something serious had just changed. Because, Holt said quietly, that mark doesn't belong to nurses. The gym remained silent. Clara exhaled slowly, as if she knew the moment she'd tried to avoid had finally arrived. Holt's voice lowered even further. That symbol belongs to a unit that stopped existing 8 years ago. Mercer blinked. What unit? Holt looked back at Clara, his eyes sharp now. You were part of Phantom Medical Unit 9, weren't you? Clara closed her eyes for a moment. The room felt heavy with anticipation. Finally, she opened them again and nodded once. Across the gym, several operators exchanged confused looks. Mercer scratched the back of his head. I've never heard of that unit. Holt nodded slowly. You wouldn't have. He looked back at Clara. Because, officially, they were all killed. Clara didn't respond. Mercer stared at her again, then at the tattoo, then back at the commander. Wait, what? Holt folded his arms. 8 years ago, he said quietly, there was a mission called Operation Iron Valley. His eyes never left Clara's. And according to every classified report I ever read, you didn't survive it. Clara looked at the floor again. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Most of them didn't. The silence in the gym felt almost electric now. Mercer stared at her, realization slowly creeping across his face. The nurse he'd just insulted might not be a nurse at all, and Commander Holt hadn't even begun explaining why. Clara's quiet answer hung in the air like smoke. Most of them didn't? For several seconds, no one spoke. The operators around the gym looked from Clara to Commander Holt and back again. trying to piece together what was happening. Mercer rubbed the back of his neck. "Sir, with respect, I still don't get it." Holt didn't answer him right away. His eyes stayed locked on Clara. "Operation Iron Valley," he said slowly. "You remember the canyon?" Clara gave a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Hard to forget." A few of the operators shifted uncomfortably. Something about the tone between them felt heavier than a normal conversation. Mercer crossed his arms again, but this time the attitude was gone. "So, what was it?" he asked. "Some kind of classified deployment?" Holt finally looked at him. It wasn't just classified. His voice lowered. It was a disaster. Clara stared at the rubber floor beneath her shoes. Holt continued. 8 years ago, a Tier 1 SEAL team was deployed near the Arizona-Sonora corridor. Intelligence said a cartel convoy was transporting advanced weapons through the mountains. Mercer frowned. "So we hit the convoy." "That was the plan." Holt nodded. But the convoy was bait. The gym had gone completely still now. No one touched the weights. No one spoke. Holt's eyes drifted slightly, like he wasn't seeing the gym anymore, like he was somewhere else. "The canyon looked empty when we arrived," he said quietly. "Too quiet. That should have been the first warning." Clara's jaw tightened. Holt continued. "We moved in just before sunrise. The cliffs were high on both sides. No cover except the trucks we were targeting." Mercer leaned forward slightly. "What happened?" Holt looked at Clara again. "You tell it better than I can." For a moment she didn't respond. Then she let out a long breath. "It wasn't a convoy," she said. "It was a trap." The operators listening exchanged uneasy glances. Clara's voice stayed calm, but something inside it sounded tired. "The first explosion hit our rear vehicle," she said. "Blew it straight into the canyon wall." Mercer's eyebrows rose. "Ambush?" Clara nodded. "Machine guns opened up from both ridges." Holt spoke quietly beside her. "They had us surrounded before we even understood what was happening." Mercer shook his head slowly. "Jesus," Clara continued. "2 operators went down immediately. Another took shrapnel through his leg." Her eyes seemed distant now, like she was replaying something she had never truly escaped. "I remember Holt dragging one of them behind the truck." Holt gave a faint nod. "And I remember you running straight into open fire." Several operators looked at Clara again, surprised. Mercer blinked. "Wait, you mean she was the medic?" Clara shrugged slightly. "That was my job." Mercer stared. "You ran into machine gun fire?" Clara gave a dry laugh. "Someone had to stop the bleeding." Holt folded his arms. "She treated 3 wounded operators in less than 5 minutes." One of the younger SEALs whistled softly. Clara continued quietly. But it kept getting worse. The room felt colder somehow. More fighters appeared on the ridgelines. RPGs started hitting the trucks. Mercer leaned forward. "How many were there?" Clara shrugged. "Enough," Holt added grimly. "We counted over 40 later." A low murmur passed through the gym. Mercer looked stunned. "You were outnumbered 40 to what? 10? 12, Holt corrected. Clara nodded slowly. "And they had the high ground." Mercer muttered under his breath. "That's a death sentence." Clara's eyes flickered toward him. "That's what we thought too." The silence deepened. Holt continued the story quietly. "One of our guys took a round through his shoulder. Another had shrapnel in his chest." Clara looked down at her hands. They were losing blood fast. Mercer asked softly, "What did you do?" Clara shrugged again. "What medics do." Holt shook his head. That's not the whole story. Clara gave him a look. Adrian. But Holt continued. You didn't just treat them. He looked around the gym. You dragged a 200-pound operator through open ground while bullets were hitting the dirt around you. Mercer's mouth opened slightly. Clara sighed. He was bleeding out. Holt nodded. And if she hadn't reached him... He didn't finish the sentence. Everyone understood. Mercer rubbed his face slowly. So how did you survive? Clara didn't answer immediately. Her expression darkened slightly. Barely. Holt looked down at the floor. The ambush lasted almost 40 minutes. Mercer whispered. 40? Felt longer, Clara said. She paused. Air support couldn't reach us. Communications were jammed. The gym remained silent. Clara continued. By the end of it, we were running out of ammunition. Holt spoke quietly beside her. Most of the team was already down. Mercer swallowed. And you? Clara's voice dropped. I was trying to keep the last two alive. Her eyes flickered briefly toward Holt. One of them was him. Mercer blinked. You saved the commander? Holt shook his head. She tried. Clara looked at him. You survived. Because of you. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The operators watching exchanged quiet looks. The tension in the room had completely changed. Mercer finally asked the question everyone was thinking. But if you survived, why were you listed as dead? Clara exhaled slowly. Because after the last explosion, her voice trailed off. Holt finished quietly. We lost sight of her. Clara nodded. One of the RPGs hit the truck I was behind. Mercer leaned forward. Did it hit you? Clara tapped the side of her ribs lightly. Caught some shrapnel. A couple of operators winced. But the blast knocked me unconscious. Holt spoke softly. When the rescue team arrived hours later, the canyon looked like a graveyard. Clara stared at the floor again. They thought everyone was gone, Mercer whispered. But you weren't. Clara shook her head. No. She paused. I woke up sometime that night. Mercer leaned closer. In the canyon? Clara nodded. Everything was burning. The operators listening were completely silent now. No radio, no weapons left. Holt watched her carefully, and cartel patrols were already searching the area. Mercer's eyes widened. You were alone? Clara nodded again. For 2 days. The words hung heavy. 2 days moving through the mountains, she continued. Trying not to bleed out, and trying not to get captured. Mercer shook his head slowly. That's insane. Clara gave a small shrug. It wasn't fun. One of the operators asked quietly, How did you get out? Clara hesitated, then answered simply, I kept walking. The room remained silent. Mercer looked at her differently now, not with annoyance, not with arrogance, but something closer to disbelief. So you walked out of cartel territory with shrapnel wounds. Clara nodded. Eventually crossed into a small border town. Holt added quietly, where a contact pulled her out. Mercer ran a hand through his hair. And the military just let you disappear? Clara's expression hardened slightly. The program shut down soon after. Holt nodded. Phantom Medical Unit 9 was dissolved. Mercer blinked. Just like that? Holt shrugged slightly. Too many losses. Clara looked around the gym slowly. Most of us didn't want to keep doing it anyway. Mercer glanced at her scrubs again. So you became a nurse? Clara nodded. Seemed simpler. The operators exchanged looks again. After everything she'd described, simple didn't feel like the right word. Mercer cleared his throat awkwardly. Well, he rubbed the back of his neck again. I guess I owe you an apology. Clara looked at him. For what? Mercer gestured toward the bench press. For earlier. Clara's lips twitched slightly. You were protecting your gym. Mercer shook his head. No. He looked genuinely embarrassed now. I was being an idiot. A few operators chuckled softly. Clara shrugged. It happens. But Holt was still watching her closely. There was something else in his expression now. Something thoughtful. Clara, he said quietly. She looked at him. You never answered the real question. Her brow furrowed slightly. What question? Holt folded his arms. Why come back here? The gym fell silent again. Clara glanced around the room, at the weights, at the operators, then back at Holt. Her voice was quiet. Because this place reminds me of them. No one asked who them meant. They all knew. The fallen team from Iron Valley. Mercer swallowed slowly. For the first time since the confrontation began, no one in the gym looked at Clara Hayes like a civilian anymore. And the night was about to take one more turn none of them expected. Mercer stared at Clara for a long moment. The gym felt different now. A few minutes ago, she had just been the nurse he tried to kick out. Now the room felt like it had shifted around her. Someone who had walked through an ambush, dragged wounded operators through gunfire, and survived 2 days alone in cartel territory, was standing right in front of them, wearing hospital scrubs. Mercer rubbed his jaw slowly. All right, he said quietly. That's one hell of a story. Clara didn't react. She simply picked up her water bottle from the floor and took a sip. Across the room, one of the younger operators whispered to another, No way she's serious. The other replied, Commander Holt wouldn't play along if it wasn't real. Mercer cleared his throat and gestured toward the bench. So, you were finishing your set. Clara looked at the bar. Yeah. Mercer stepped back and raised his hand slightly. All yours. For the first time since the confrontation began, a few faint smiles appeared around the gym. Clara lay back on the bench again. The barbell lifted. 200 pounds moved up and down in steady rhythm. 1 rep, 2, 3. The operators watched quietly now. No mocking, no comments. Just quiet respect. When she racked the bar again, Mercer shook his head slowly. All right, I'll admit it. Clara sat up. Admit what? You're stronger than half the guys in here. A few operators groaned in protest. Hey, Mercer smirked slightly. You know I'm right. Clara slid off the bench. I didn't come here to compete. Mercer shrugged. Still counts. She reached down to grab her towel when another voice spoke from across the room. You never told them the craziest part. Everyone turned. Commander Holt was still standing nearby, arms folded. Clara frowned slightly. Adrian. But Holt continued. The part where you saved my life. Mercer blinked. Wait, that part wasn't clear already? Holt shook his head slowly. No. He looked around the gym. They should hear the whole thing. Clara exhaled. You don't have to do that. Holt ignored her. During the ambush, I caught a round in my side. Mercer's eyes widened. That explains the scar. Holt nodded once. I was bleeding out behind the truck. He looked at Clara, and the canyon was still under heavy fire. Clara crossed her arms. You're exaggerating. Holt raised an eyebrow. Am I? He looked back at the operators. She ran 30 yards through open ground while machine gun rounds were hitting the dirt around her. Several operators cursed quietly under their breath. 30 yards? Clara shook her head. I didn't measure it. Holt continued calmly. She patched the wound, stabilized the bleeding, and dragged me to cover. Mercer stared at her. You dragged the commander? Clara shrugged. He was heavier back then. A few people laughed. Even Holt allowed a small smile. Mercer rubbed his forehead slowly. So let me get this straight. He pointed between Holt and Clara. You saved him, under fire, while the team was getting wiped out. Clara didn't respond. Holt answered instead. Yes. Mercer let out a low whistle. Damn. Another operator stepped forward slightly. Why didn't we ever hear about this? Holt's expression hardened. Because Phantom Medic operations were buried in classified reports. Clara nodded. Most people weren't supposed to know we existed. Mercer shook his head slowly. Well, mission accomplished. The tension in the room finally softened. But Holt's gaze remained thoughtful. He looked at Clara again. You still move like an operator. Clara frowned. What does that mean? Holt gestured toward the bench press. You lift like you're still training for deployment. Clara shrugged. Habit? Mercer laughed lightly. Most nurses don't bench 200 pounds out of habit. Clara leaned against the rack. Old habits die hard. Mercer looked around the room. Well, I think we can all agree on one thing. Everyone waited. He grinned slightly. I'm never telling a nurse to leave the gym again. A few operators laughed. Clara shook her head. You're making this bigger than it is. Mercer raised an eyebrow. Bigger than it is? He pointed at Holt. You literally saved the commander during a cartel ambush. Clara picked up her water bottle again. And? Mercer stared at her. And that's insane. Clara took another sip. It was my job. Holt watched her carefully. That was the part that always struck him. No pride, no dramatic stories, just quiet acceptance. The kind of attitude he had only seen in the best operators. One of the younger SEALs finally stepped forward. Ma'am? Clara looked at him. Yes? He hesitated. Is it true you walked 2 days through cartel territory with shrapnel wounds? Clara nodded once. That's what the story says. The operator shook his head in disbelief. That's crazy. Clara gave a faint smile. Adrenaline helps. Mercer laughed. You're being modest. Clara shrugged. Not really. Holt looked around the gym slowly. Every operator in the room was focused on her now. He cleared his throat. Listen up. The room went quiet instantly. These men train every day preparing for combat. He nodded toward Clara. But sometimes the toughest people on the battlefield aren't the ones carrying rifles. Several operators nodded slowly. Mercer looked at Clara again. His earlier arrogance was completely gone now. Hey, she glanced at him. Yes? He gestured toward the rack. You finished all your sets? Clara looked at the weights. Yeah. Mercer stepped forward and extended his hand. Then I owe you a proper introduction. She looked at his hand briefly before shaking it. Clara Hayes. Dylan Mercer. He smiled slightly. Former idiot. Clara chuckled softly. Apology accepted? The tension that had filled the gym earlier had completely transformed. Operators returned to their workouts. Weights clanged again. Music hummed from the speakers. But every few seconds someone glanced toward Clara with quiet respect. She grabbed her towel and slung it over her shoulder. I should get back to the hospital. Mercer frowned. Already? Night shift. Holt nodded. Still saving lives. Clara smiled faintly. Just in a quieter way. She started walking toward the exit. Mercer watched her go, then shook his head again. You know what's wild? Holt glanced at him. What? Mercer pointed toward the door Clara had just walked through. If you hadn't noticed that tattoo, he paused, I'd still think she was just a nurse who wandered into the wrong gym. Holt nodded slowly. That's the thing about real heroes. Mercer raised an eyebrow. What's that? They rarely announce themselves. Across the room, the younger operator spoke up again. Sir? Holt looked at him. Yes? The operator asked carefully. Why didn't she ever tell anyone about Iron Valley? Holt looked toward the closed gym doors. For a moment he didn't answer. Then he said quietly, because the people who carry the heaviest battles usually don't need the world to know about them. The gym fell silent again for a moment. Mercer nodded slowly. Then he looked around the room. Well, boys, he grinned. I think we just got the most humbling workout lesson of our careers. Several operators laughed. One of them added, yeah. Another shook his head. Next time I see someone in scrubs lifting in here. Mercer interrupted him. You're offering them the bench. Everyone chuckled. Holt allowed himself a small smile. But his gaze drifted back toward the door Clara had exited. Some heroes stayed on the battlefield. Others quietly walked away from it. And sometimes, they ended up right beside you in the gym without anyone realizing who they really were. If this story surprised you as much as it surprised the SEALs that night, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what you would have done if you were in Mercer's place. Because sometimes the strongest people in the room are the ones nobody expects.